So that's my little introduction of Charlotte Johnson. And Charlotte was the first designer for the Barbie brand, for the Barbie doll, and she was hired by Ruth Handler. So I'm going to take you on a little tour now of just the history. So when you're going to learn about the Barbie designers, it's always best to start in the beginning. And sorry, here we go. So usually the first introduction that most Barbie collector or even a child that played with Barbie as a kid found out about Charlotte Johnson was the initials CJ. And in the 70s, they did packaging for Barbie that on the back said that Barbie's fabulous clothing was designed by CJ of California. And, you know, as a kid, when I read this, it kind of put in my head that somebody actually had to figure this out. Somebody actually had to do this. And what an amazing job that you got to design the wardrobe for the world's most fabulous doll, and, you know, how cool that had to be. So I started trying to learn out who CJ or Charlotte Johnson was. So I created what I call the Charlotte experiment, where I wanted to retrace the footsteps, and I wanted to understand when and why everything happened, and I wanted to document every piece of information that I could for future study, mainly because Charlotte sort of exited the Barbie world before Barbie became the huge collectible that she is today. So she never really saw what Barbie came to be. So we'll start in 1956, and this is Ruth Handler. Ruth Handler and her husband are the co-founders of Mattel Toys, and this is on a trip to Europe in 1956. Prior to this, she had watched her daughter play with paper dolls and had this idea that if they could create a three-dimensional paper doll, a doll that was an adult with a wardrobe, that she felt like that would be an amazing thing. So this is on this trip, and I like to think that she's smiling so big because she just went into the store and bought the Lily doll. That's just because she looks very happy in this picture. I kind of dig the cool sunglasses. So then she, you know, heads back to California after this trip, and she goes to sort of their chief guy and VP at Mattel, Jack Ryan, who sounds like he's part of a Tom Clancy novel, the character from that, but he wasn't quite that, you know, espionage kind of guy, but he did work on the Sparrow and Hawk missiles for the U.S. government, and he was Zsa Zsa Gabor's fourth husband. She was his second wife, and just a little bit about Jack Ryan. He was like the ultimate party dude. He lived in Bel Air in a house that looked like a castle. He had a fire truck that they would throw crazy parties, get bombed, jumped on the fire truck, drive downtown to LA to go to the discos and stuff. He was like the party guy. And I think how they met each other, Zsa Zsa and he, was she lived behind him. And I think she heard all the noise and all the craziness, and so she decided if you can't beat them, join them. So that's what she did. So he worked with multiple sculptors to try and make this Barbie project happen. And these sculptors were sort of dotted all over California. No one sculptor reinterpreted Lily into Barbie. It was sort of a group effort. And after getting the sculpt sort of finalized, then they had to go and figure out the makeup. And so he turned to his friend Bud Westmore. And if you know anything about Bud Westmore, he's a Hollywood makeup artist who did a lot of special effects and stuff in the 1950s. So he helped kind of come up with Barbie's face. And so we kind of think of Barbie as the Hollywood girl. So she's got this sort of like Hollywood background, and, you know, this is the Max Factor building where Bud Westmore worked. So Mattel had wanted this to be sort of a key turn kind of thing. They wanted to send it all to Japan. They wanted it all to be shipped back and everything done. And so they worked with a company in Japan called Kokusai Boeki, who was going to do all the production for the doll and the wardrobe and the accessories. And, you know, everybody likes to think that Mattel just went to Japan, built a factory, and started cranking out Barbie dolls. Well, they didn't. They had to work with all of these other factories to get this stuff done. So they had hired a designer, and she didn't work out, and then they hired this other designer named Kazuko Yoshida. And I think what more or less was the problem was they were designing doll clothes. And Ruth Handler did not want doll clothes. She wanted fashion. She wanted real clothing in miniature scale for Barbie. And so it was an unsuccessful attempt, so they come back and Ruth goes to Chenard, which is now part of Cal Arts in California. They teach design and lots of art and stuff there. It's was an amazing sort of institute, and they went to Chenard and they were like, we need someone to have a student or someone that could design for Barbie, and they sent them to Charlotte. And so Charlotte listened to them and listened to Ruth and discovered that they'd actually met before at a party, and I think Charlotte decided that she would kind of accept this challenge. Charlotte was a former women's wear designer. She went to school here in Kansas City. She studied at Kansas City Art Institute, and she got her first job here in Kansas City with a dress manufacturer here. And if you don't know this, in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, probably 40% of the dresses that were worn by women in America were manufactured here in Kansas City, second only to the New York garment district. So it was a sort of a hubbub of women's apparel manufacturing here. So she got her start here and ended up in New York, but then something took her to California. So after some discussion with Ruth, Ruth provided her with a laundry list of things that she would want to have produced for Barbie. And it was sort of like, everything that, anybody would need: lingerie, wedding gowns, party clothes. It was everything. And so they met at a coffee shop in California, in Hollywood actually, to discuss. And we think that this is the location. We have some documentation kind of led us to this. It's now a restaurant. It's not the coffee shop anymore, but it's right off of Sunset Boulevard, not too far from where Charlotte was living, in her one-bedroom apartment on Martel Avenue. It's this crazy little building, and you're going to discover that I'm quite the Charlotte stalker. I kind of like went all over, finding out where she lived and what she'd done and that sort of thing. And so she lived in this apartment about the same time that she would have been designing this first wardrobe for Barbie. And she designed a lot of it at her kitchen table. So she was trial and error and experimentation. And, she was looking for inspiration. So she turned to Vogue magazine and got a lot of inspiration there. And this is actually the issue that she looked at. This issue stayed with her. And if you ever see this issue of Vogue and you flip through it, you see some of that inspiration for that first Barbie wardrobe. So she presented Ruth with these little garments for Barbie, and explained not only how they were made, but how they could be mass produced. She had a knowledge of production. She had a knowledge of making things simple, and I think that really impressed Ruth Handler. And so she's introduced to Frank Nakamura, Seymour Adler, and Elliot Handler, and she's going to accompany them to Japan to set up the production for the Barbie doll. So the first thing that Charlotte did was she heads to the May Company. How do I know that? Well, you're going to find out in a minute. And she purchases sewing patterns, not to get the idea for pattern, not to get anything but inspiration from the illustrations on these envelopes. And you probably wonder how I know that, so I'm going to show you. This photograph appears in a book written by Fumiko Miyatsuka, and she was the sample maker for Charlotte in Japan, and she wrote a book. The book is all in Japanese. There's some fabulous images in it, and I reference a lot of this because I had a very good friend of mine translate this for me and portions of it so we can have a better understanding. So this is the book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and she talks about this era of Charlotte coming to Japan. Say they would have left from Los Angeles to fly to Japan. It would have been the era of like the first jet service starting up around 57, 58. And so this is Fumiko. And Fumiko was not married at the time and was going to be introduced at the Tokyo Narita airport as a girl that could sew. So she was going to be Charlotte's sample maker, and they were going to set up shop to make these designs for Barbie. This is the airport, and this is from 1958 when they would have been arriving. And this, so just to give you a sense of what it looked like there during this time period. They were met at the airport, and Fumiko was meeting an American woman for the very first time. Up until this time, the only Americans she'd ever seen were soldiers. And a little interesting tidbit that I'll probably refer to a lot is that Fumiko spoke no English. Charlotte spoke no Japanese. They would work together for a year with hand gestures and sketches and just learning how to communicate with each other without the words. So this is the Imperial Hotel, and the foreground is Imperial 1, and behind it is what they call Imperial 2. This was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was a beautiful hotel. It's the front part has been preserved and moved somewhere else. It was heavily damaged by an earthquake. If you were to look over top of this front part of the hotel and look down, the center structure creates the I, the outer structure creates the H for Imperial Hotel. So I find that kind of fascinating. They were given, they decided to stay in this hotel. It was very well appointed. It was very Western in style and food and that sort of thing. So it was a wonderful place to be staying. And these are once again some snapshots of what it looked like during that period of time that Charlotte was staying there. Now we have, in the center here is Elliot Handler. He's flanked with Frank Nakamura and Seymour Adler, who were there to set up production for some doll furniture. They were more interested in the doll furniture than they were in the Barbie doll. So they kind of got Charlotte set up in her suite that had like a little boardroom, and there was space for them to work, and Mr. Nakamura was helping them get fabrics and stuff and would do some translating for them. But for the most part, they were there each day just kind of like drafting patterns and making samples and stuff. And from Fumiko's book, here are some of the original samples that were being produced. As you look at some of these, you can kind of see why maybe they weren't chosen for the line, and there are a couple of them, including that one in the top left-hand corner, that I'm kind of wondering why they didn't choose that one, because I kind of like it. So it's a great little sample of what they were doing. So in Fumiko's book, she describes that they were using the TPO method for creating for Barbie. It was the time, the place, and the occasion. The time of day she would be wearing the garment, where she would be wearing it, and for what sort of occasion she would need this garment for. So they sort of spent their days working and designing and creating. And so so here we have Barbie in what I call the most unnecessary garments that were ever designed for her. A bra and a girdle, because we know that plastic for the most part does not sag. But up until this point, when they designed for a doll, either the doll came dressed, or if you got a stripped down doll, it came in lingerie. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of play value when you get a doll dressed in lingerie. So they decided to do the doll dressed in swimsuit. So the moment you got your doll, you already had play value. She could be going to the pool, she could be going to the beach, or laying out and sunbathing. There was some play value mixed in with this. So the original swimsuit, as you know, is that classic, iconic black and white striped swimsuit. And the fabric from this was supplied by Yosuke Mariyasu, which designed a lot of fabrics that were used for children's wear. And the intended purpose for this fabric was probably like the cuffs and collars for like a child's jacket. And it was originally conceived in red, but I think they probably were able to get a bulk of black and white, so that's what we got. And Mariyasu is the Japanese word that kind of means like knitwear or knitted. So do you know what this is? Crazy shape, crazy shape.
The template for the bathing suit.
It is actually the pattern for the bathing suit. And Charlotte, in designing for Barbie, looked at simplicity. It was a crazy kind of thing that she wanted to eliminate seams, difficulty, one piece, you know, that sort of thing. So those top little L-shaped sort of areas are the darts for the bust. The two curved sides on the outside are the center front, and the middle is the center back. So essentially you're looking at the two darts in one seam to kind of put this all together. The other thing that she knew that Charlotte knew Barbie would need was sweaters. She wanted to have sort of a classic sort of sweater. Fumiko was an avid knitter, so she would like lay awake at night knitting all these tiny little sweaters and stuff for Barbie. So Charlotte finally made a selection, and then Fumiko traveled to a knitting mill that usually produced hosiery and to set up the production for these sweaters. And the hosiery mill was Nomura Mariasu Hosiery Mill, and they would machine knit this classic little sweater, this little twin set for Barbie, which is one of my favorite garments because, I mean, what teenager wasn't worth her weight in twin sets in the 1950s? I mean, cashmere twin sets. And so it's knitted by machine, and it was a little shell that had snaps in the back and a cardigan with the Barbie label. And the initial order for that was 250,000 pieces. Now, what I'll tell you is Mattel was literally betting the farm because, if every one of these garments they were ordering this quantity, that meant that they felt confident that they'd be able to sell this. So, I mean, this was a huge order, and it was so popular they reordered on this particular garment 2 more times. So if you wonder why this outfit's kind of common, now you know. I sat down with a really good friend of mine who taught machine knitting at FIT for a while, and we dissected one of these. We took it apart, we counted stitches, we cut it, and she just was like in awe at how they were able to do what they did. So along with doing the knitted stuff, they needed fabric and trim, and so this is sort of one of the fabrics areas of Tokyo, Japan in that era. So I mean, you can just imagine that Fumiko and Charlotte would go out on missions trying to find fabric and trying to look for the right scale, the right type to supply for Barbie's clothes. So this is Japan, a department store in the 1950s. This is the doll department. I couldn't help but sharing this because it's just pink and frothy and pretty and just kind of amazing. So I mean, I'd like to sometimes just give a visual and give a touchstone for what it was like during that era, just to see what they were experiencing. So sometimes when they couldn't find what they were looking for in those fabric districts, they would go to a department store. And in one case, Fumiko recounts Charlotte needing a particular kind of lace, and they went everywhere and they couldn't find it. So they ended up in the lingerie department of a department store, and Charlotte purchased a slip. She brought it back to their little design studio at the Imperial Hotel and ripped the lace off the slip and threw the rest of the slip away. And Fumiko was just mortified because that was such a luxurious item at the time. I mean, it was an expensive item, and to think that it was only worth the lace and tearing it off and throwing it away. So, but that's when she kind of had this moment of discovering that nothing was too good for Barbie, and that this was a really important project. And so we think this is the dress that got the lace from the slip. This is a sample that was made that was not accepted in the line. We think it was going to be the inspiration for Plantation Belle. And I'm sorry, this kind of blows out the pictures on some of them. But it was a classic pink confection of, dotted nylon with lace and trim and a big wide brim hat. So it was every little girl's fantasy dress. It was just the prettiest thing for that. So I was so impressed with this garment when I took it apart, and just so you know, I have dissected and taken apart every single garment from 1959 and studied it,
Wow.
made the patterns. I mean, even the rare ones, luckily you can find them sometimes in poor condition, and so you can kind of have this sort of experiment. If you look in the photograph on the right, you see that weird sort of pattern piece. That's the bodice, and if you'll note, there are no darts. And, if you know Barbie, she's got a bust, something needs to make that fit. But I think the way the pattern is curved, the way it's designed, it fits her kind of like a glove. And I think it's just the magic of Charlotte's pattern making and skills. And what I also did with each one of these garments is, as I dissected it, I found similar fabrics. I put them back together and remade some of them, so you kind of understand how it all comes together. So in Barbie's first line, there are a lot of artificial flowers, and these were supplied by Hiroshi Fukushima, which was a legendary silk flower manufacturer. And I think they made all kinds of silk flowers. They probably have them in Matt Alexander hats and Barbie hats and purses and stuff. So it was a really popular kind of thing. So they were looking at every resource to find these things. So one of the funniest stories is this outfit, which is called Peachy Fleecy. You know, there's a feather in this hat. And so they ordered the feathers, and they reordered on the feathers, and they reordered on the feathers. So the company that supplied them in Belgium actually sent their representative to Japan to figure out, like, okay, what are you doing with all of these feathers? They found out they were making Barbie hats. So this outfit, the Peachy Fleecy, is, you know, this iconic sort of camel color coat. And when it was designed, Charlotte would give specific orders as how things were to be done. And so when Fumiko carried this to the manufacturer wanted to eliminate a cut in the collar. And he convinced Fumiko to eliminate that cut. It would save so much time in manufacturing, and so she went along with it. So when they brought the sample to Charlotte, Charlotte was very angry because the collar on this coat would not stay down. It was flopping up, and she discovered they'd eliminated this cut, and she was livid. And Fumiko was just mortified and, you know, wanted to just like resign because she had disappointed Charlotte. And she was like, "This is not your fault. That was his fault. He convinced you to do this. You did not suggest this." And so that's when Fumiko knew that she was going to follow the law of Charlotte, that Charlotte knew exactly what she was doing. So, so she was, you know, an ambassador for Charlotte. So everything, I think, in this environment that they were living in, Creating Bar, had to be an inspiration. And so when they were trying to create hats, they served lunch one day, and the rice bowl had a lid on it, and it was like the perfect scale for Barbie's hat. So with a little bit of straw cloth and a rubber band and wetting it, they made the very famous iconic hat for Suburban Shopper, which is kind of hard to see in this picture, but it's this big cartwheel hat, and it was, you know, sort of the quintessential thing. And so they actually, of course, they didn't make all the hats on a rice bowl lid, but that's where they got the initial design and the shape. And they were able to create the Suburban Shopper outfit. So, which is, you know, they went on to be made for years. So while they're figuring out hats, a sink played a big role into this. So this, as Fumiko was, you know, washing up one day to leave, she looked at the spigot and she discovered that the bottom of the spigot was about the same size as Barbie's head. So she took more of the straw cloth, put it on the bottom of the spigot and rubber banded it, and while it was wet, and she told Charlotte, "Do not use this sink until I get here tomorrow morning." So Charlotte left the sink alone, and so the next morning they came in, they took it off, and this is the beginning of the hat for picnic set. And so, I mean, it's one of my favorite little hats. It's got a little plastic frog on it. So once again, they would venture out and explore and look for things. And you have to imagine what an interesting relationship that had to be of being together for like a year, not really being able to have a conversation. So this is 1958, somewhere in Japan, just sort of like wandering around. And so here's a view of the factory that was actually where they manufactured the Barbie doll itself. Someone shared a picture of this, and so I just kind of borrowed it for this. It's, you know, sort of like a simple looking structure, but that's where the magic was made. So I like to think that, you know, this is what the inside of the factory looked. All the little workers in cute little smocks, and, you know, everyone seeming tidy, you know, but, you know, that's not exactly what it looked like. It's more this hubbub of activity, and, you know, a little bit crowded, and this was, you know, a lot of dolls being made. And everyone always asks me, "Bradley, what kind of tiny little sewing machine did they use to make these Barbie clothes?" And I'm going to tell you, it was like these giant industrial sewing machines. There was no magic little teeny tiny sewing machine doing this. But Charlotte figured out how to do things using this and ease of manufacturing. We all have heard horror stories of like, "I tried to sew for Barbie and it just didn't work." Yeah, because we're trying to sew for Barbie like we sew for ourselves, and it's just, you can't do that. You have to, work out things differently. So one of the things that everybody needs is a purse. So, and Barbie was going to need many of them. So they tried to figure out a cost-effective way to develop a purse, and it was difficult because, purses of the time were structured and unique, and so that was like a cost that was going to have to be incurred, but they were trying to find the cheapest way to produce it. So the next thing one day when they were discussing this is Fumiko took some cardboard and some straw and some cloth, and she created this little bag, and so they decided to make this. They could make it into the fruit tote as they did. They put flowers in it, and it was using up sort of like materials that were very inexpensive, that were readily available, but was creating this sort of like stylish sort of, purse that everyone kind of carried in the summertime. And it was a great little bag that was very cost effective. The other thing that was required was jewelry. So a bead manufacturer provided these teeny tiny little pearls for them to create the little pearl choker and the triple strand necklace. And then a company called Dai Nippon Plastics supplied them with, they were a celluloid manufacturer, and so the little fish, the sunglasses, and all of this other little stuff that was going to be necessary for Barbie's wardrobe, they supplied a lot of that. So it was like a whole, it takes a village to raise a child, what took a community to manufacture Barbie. So this is one of the most unaptly named garments of Barbie. I always say, here is Easter parade, and I can imagine that Barbie for Easter is, donning her dark printed sheath dress and her black taffeta coat. It's just, but we discover that this taffeta coat, which is amazing, this is the pattern, this is the actual pattern that was used to produce that coat. You see how the sleeve, the arm's eye is upside down, so there's no side seam. The sleeves are set in upside down, and then we discover the coat was originally going to be produced in white, which kind of makes sense, like a spring coat, but they feared that it would get dirty too quickly, and so they figured doing it in black it would be better. So Barbie's clothes are die cut, which means they would make a die that's the shape of the pattern. They use this sort of like hydraulic press to cut out the clothes, so everything is cut perfectly. It's all the same size, and there was like a science to how those dies would be placed on the thing. So this is actually the bodice and panty pattern that's for the Busy Gal blouse. It mysteriously made its appearance in the catalogs in polka dots. It came to us in stripes though, so I had to make my own polka dot version. So, but you see how things kind of fit together and how it, minimal waste and that sort of thing. So here are the gentlemen of YKK Zipper. And for those of you who love Barbie, you love this little teeny tiny zippers, and they're all marked YKK. Well, this is the company that manufactured them. And the company is Yoshida Kogyo. Yeah, and we're not going to say that last word. We need Alan Scott Pate to say that today. But this was the first time that they had manufactured a zipper in what was called a size 0. It was a teeny tiny little zipper. And after they started doing these little dresses with these zippers, they started getting letters from little girls. Why don't all the dresses have this zipper? And so their response, which was kind of funny, well, do all of your dresses have zippers in them? So it was kind of funny, but we love those little zippers. So at the end of the day, or the end of her time in Japan, they had created 22 fashions for Barbie, and it was very modern. It was very cutting edge. When you look at it, you see the sort of you still feel the 50s in there. So there's still a flavor of the 50s, but you see that we're going to be moving forward. And a lot of people say, well, it's very Jackie Kennedy. Well, let's keep in mind, this is, 58, 59. Jackie Kennedy really isn't even on our roadmap yet. I mean, she's an icon for later. So this is well before that. So maybe Jackie copied Barbie. So, but what we'll also say was, this is what the line looked like, but it could have looked a little different, because on those earliest boxes for Barbie, there are these enigmas: the orange shift dress, the pink ballerina dress, and this blue halter dress with a jacket. And so we've all felt that the peachy fleecy coat, which was that camel colored coat that just came with the coat and the hat, may have been once a sort of a combination outfit, because the apple print sheath and the cruise striped dress were the foundations for Roman holiday and Easter parade. They just added the coat. So we kind of feel like this orange dress would have been the peachy and the fleecy part of this outfit, but then I think they eliminated it for whatever reason. The pink ballerina could actually be what eventually happened in 61 with the silver, so that could have been designed and just kind of like put in a holding pattern. And then the blue dress we really don't know, but it's kind of a cool thing in that we finally get to lay our eyes on the peachy dress. And this orange colored dress is still part of Fumiko's collection. She kept a lot of the samples in her own collection and was able to take that home. So thank goodness it was preserved and we can actually see what it looked like. So with any company that does manufacture, we talk about quota. And with Mattel and with Barbie, when you look at like the early 60s, you see that if you're going to do the Silk and Flame outfit, and you're going to use that red velvet, well, you need to do a red velvet coat. And yeah, we're going to use that red velvet fabric for Ken's Arabian Nights. And yeah, we might do a skipper outfit in that red velvet. So it's like if you're going to buy red velvet, we're going to figure out a way to use up all that red velvet. So the first thing that I noticed for 59, where there was actual quota, her gold hoop earring, which is actually like a gold-toned aluminum, was the little gold hoop that held the hair bow on for her Sleeping Pretty outfit. And it's actually the hoop that is the clasp on the purse for Evening Splendor. So it's like the first time you kind of see where this whole little, if you're going to use gold hoops, you're going to have to use gold hoops everywhere. So Charlotte looked for a lot of inspiration, and she saw a lot of inspiration in magazines and just of her own style. But one night at the Imperial Hotel, she would go down for dinner. And one of the things that Fumiko accounts is when they would go for dinner or lunch or something, Charlotte would order like a steak, which was like unheard of as far as like, it was so expensive. Like her earning the steak was like Charlotte, half of Fumiko's salary for the month. So when she would go down to the restaurant, one of the Mattel gentlemen that was with her recounted later in a book that anytime a gentleman or an American would walk in, Charlotte would chat them up. She would try and engage them. And when I read that, I immediately kind of thought that maybe was Charlotte like this fast girl that was always trying to make a connection or something. Well, Carol Spencer, who has been very instrumental in the collection here at our museum, told me, she's like, Bradley, Charlotte was straight lace. And she said, Bradley, she was over there for a year. There was no one to talk to. No one spoke English. And so she would go down to dinner at the hotel and look for anybody that would possibly speak English and engage them just to carry on a conversation. And one night at dinner, she recounted to Carol that this beautiful man and woman walked in. This woman was wearing this beautiful bubble dress. And Balenciaga had designed a bubble dress in the late 50s, which had been very popular and kind of created a new style. And Charlotte, it sort of stuck with her. And the person, I think the gentleman was an Italian movie star. I've not been able to figure out who it was. But I feel like that seeing the bubble dress in person really kind of inspired Charlotte to create the gay Parisian dress for Barbie, which is one of my favorites. So now this little roadmap here is the pattern for the apple print sheath. I'll show you a little clip of it in a minute. But when you look at this, this is the actual pattern. You see how it's all cut in one piece. That bodice is one piece. You've got the darts. There's no side seams. And you see how the armholes are upside down. So the other thing you'll see is the front, the bodice that kind of makes that U in the middle, how the straps for the shoulders don't fall on top of the shoulder. It actually falls to the back. And the reason why it falls to the back, if that seam was on top of Barbie's shoulder, it would make it stand up too tall. So Charlotte's way, and I've heard many other designers say that Charlotte had a way of doing things, the shoulder seam was always towards the back, so you didn't see it. So you kind of see these little details of how it made it like really popular and made it work. Charlotte had this way of making it work. So when you think about all the things that you had to create for Barbie, the shoes, the jewelry, the hats, the gloves, you forget that she thought of everything. And to think that she would create this little teeny tiny stuffed dog for the nighty negligee outfit. I mean, what an attention to detail. This cute little dog, which this type of thing was so popular in the 50s. And then, you know, coming up with the pink plastic hand mirror that had the Barbie logo on it. You know, it's, you know, just these little details that make everything special and everything unique. And then finally, the outfit, you know, the piece de resistance was the wedding gown. And the final approved sample of the wedding gown, it was satin and tulle. And I think when it kind of like met its match with marketing, they were kind of like, it's a little too simple, a little too plain. So the actual tool that was used for the manufacturing was actually sort of not really flocked, but it was printed with a floral pattern and a little bit of glitter thrown to it, because you gotta love a little bit of sparkle. So at the end of the day of her time there, I think Charlotte had to be very proud of what was created. I mean, it was a stylish wardrobe. It was well thought out, and there was an ease of manufacture, and I think that she probably had to be very, very, very pleased when she returned to the United States, knowing that they had created this wardrobe for this doll and had more or less figured it all out, because this was going to be a challenge. So here is Charlotte posed at Mattel with the newly innovative bubble cut Barbie at some point, and I just love this picture of her. I think she just looks really happy. And you see that she's got her pearl earrings on, and she's just stylish and classy. She's, you know, she's a beautiful person. So what she discovers when she comes back is, you know, there's a lot to accomplish, there's a lot to figure out. And so they tell her, you know, you're going to have to get some help. You're going to go to Japan and set up the production. You're going to have to go back and forth. So you're going to need some other designers. So the first rule of order is to get some new designers. So the first designer that I don't have a photograph with me is Dorothy Shue. And Dorothy came from sort of an interesting background. She was a designer, but she had worked with Sid and Marty Krofft. Now, when you think Sid and Marty Krofft, you always think H.R. Puffin stuff. Well, this is before that. And in the 50s, they developed a stage show that was called Les Poupées de Paris, which was a marionette show. And it was kind of a racy marionette show where they did all of these famous characters in marionette form. And they were at the World's Fair, and they did all this stuff. But she was, I think she really kind of nailed the job, because she was already costuming in miniature inanimate objects. So in this central picture here, we have Kay Carter. And Kay Carter had designed for Hollywood. She has some Hollywood titles under her name. And on the right is Ella Brown. And Ella had been a dress designer, had come to Mattel. And when Ella would leave, that would usher in the position that Carol Spencer would be hired. So, you know, with her exit came Carol's entrance, and thank God, because Carol's been so generous to us. So Kay Carter designed Enchanted Evening for us. So, I mean, how classic Hollywood is that? And then if you love Solo in the Spotlight, you can thank Ella Brown for that. So, the other thing they did was they set up a charge account for them at International Silk and Wool, which was actually called something there, but it's the same building, the same business that exists on Wilshire Boulevard in California. The Mattel designers still shop there. And I visit there every time I go, and I swear that there's probably some fabrics laying around there that have been there since 1958. But they have some really great fabric there. It's really kind of interesting, and you just kind of feel the inspiration. So as they're setting up the production and they're doing Toy Fair and everything's kind of coming together, they approach their good friend Walt Disney, and they want to advertise Barbie on TV. And they say, well, sure, you can advertise all of your toys on our Mickey Mouse Club TV show, but you have to buy all of the advertising. So they literally bet pretty much the entire net worth of the company in advertising with the Mickey Mouse Club. And luckily they did that, and it paid off. But I'm sure you may have seen the earliest Barbie commercial. This is a little still from that, where they sing the Barbie You're Beautiful song. And in one of the books, we discovered that the first day they shot this, all the dolls kind of like drooped and sagged because the lights were so hot. So the next day they reshot, and only because the dolls had spent the night in the freezer. So the Barbie was like the first doll that was done entirely in rotational cast vinyl. She was solid vinyl. She was the smallest doll to have a saran-rooted hair. The earliest Barbies were hand-painted. Later they airbrushed the makeup on. And so this is another clip from one of the commercials. And one of my favorite pictures of Charlotte. So I just think she was very pleased. I think she kind of saw that this was going to be her future and her career. I think she was very happy. She enjoyed traveling to the Orient and to Japan to set up the production and to finalize things. And this is Charlotte in her office at Mattel. And I mean, if you look in the background, you can see like fabric swatches, and that's the Mademoiselle color chart for the season. So I mean, they were paying attention to like real fashion. And the way that they designed for Barbie is a little bit different than the way we design for people, not just in structure, but with Barbie, they want the style to be readily accepted. You know, there's something like will come on the scene and it's like a fad, so they kind of wait till it's like widely accepted and is, you know, identifiable, and that's when they design for Barbie. That's why you never get like jellies for Barbie, or you know, crazy ugly culotte pantsuits or something. It's, you know, you get style that's, you know, iconic. And so here's a little picture from Charlotte from a newspaper ad where she was interviewed, or a newspaper article where she was interviewed. And once again, I just think she's, love the hairdo. She was the original bubble cut Barbie. So along with the whole thing with Barbie, the marketing was a huge part of this. They were advertising directly to children. And the advertising campaign for 59 had paid off so well that the toy buyers that had acted unfavorably to Barbie were just kind of like out of luck. Because Christmas 1959, like every little kid ran into the toy store, we want Barbie, and like these places didn't have Barbie, and so they're like, who's Barbie? And so there was like this time of the popularity, they couldn't satisfy demand. One of the things along with the advertising that they did was when you got your little Barbie, and the little booklet that came with her on the back, you could join the Barbie fan club. And when you joined, you would get these little newsletters, and these are some of the very first newsletters that were produced, and they talked about, you know, upcoming designs and what to do for Barbie. And one of the sketches is the Busy Gal, which is my favorite thing because it's a, you know, fashion designer like Barbie, and it shows it with this big pussycat bow and polka dot blouse. And that's what it showed up looking like in the booklet. However, you know, what we all ended up with was that striped thing. So then I had to make my own little polka dotted blouse for my doll. So. And this is inside the Mattel Design Center. In one of the programs that Carol Spencer provided to us here, she showed us this picture, and to me it's like a peek into heaven. If you look in the lower right hand side, you see like Chatty Cathy heads, and you see the sample makers working, and everyone kind of like, you know, busy creating all the toys that would be under the Christmas tree that year. It's just really kind of exciting to just have that little peek in there. In 1968, a German television documentary came to Mattel and said, we would like to interview and kind of figure out this whole Barbie phenomenon. So they actually were given permission to go into the design studio and film this. And this was filmed in 1968. Now, at this time, Charlotte would have been like 50 years old. And I want you to check out her dangly earrings, her like Pucci printed dress, and in the back you see everything they used for inspiration. It was all these European fashion magazines that we didn't have there. And as a collector, I've looked to try and find every one of those magazines that's behind her head. And they're very hard to find, and they'd be very expensive, but it's really kind of neat to see them and kind of see what they were looking at for inspiration. So I think Charlotte was really enjoying a great career at Mattel. I think it was much satisfaction to her. I think she was able to probably be more creative designing for a doll than she was designing for people. Once again, she gets the satisfaction of appearing in a magazine when Ebony magazine caught wind of the new Julia fashion doll from the TV show Julia that was played by Diane Carroll, and they came and did a story, and I think they staged a lot of these photos. I really kind of like this when they're laying out the pattern. And if you look behind the head here, you see where they've made a sign that says Fashion Design Department, in case you didn't know. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I bet you didn't know this. If you love the era of the 60s where Barbie has rooted eyelashes, you can thank Charlotte Johnson for that. She created that and actually holds the patent for that. Carol had told me how Charlotte was very well spoken and had a vast vocabulary. And when you read the patent that she had to do all of this stuff, you really discover that she had a way with words. She's pretty amazing. So, and here's another article that talks about Charlotte being Barbie's wardrobe mistress. And this is in the early 70s. And this is when they pretty much determined that the largest manufacturer of women's apparel is Mattel. They make more garments every year than any other manufacturer in the world. I mean, that's quite the feat, quite an undertaking to think that. So, Charlotte was a really big help to the handlers and to Mattel. She really laid a foundation and a groundwork in creating for Barbie and then passing these skills on to the other designers. And Mattel really appreciated what she was able to accomplish. And so around 1978, they presented her with this award, which is a gilded Barbie doll. And on the plaque, it says, "To Charlotte, our sincere appreciation for 20 years of continual contribution to Barbie and Mattel." And I mean, I think that's just a great sort of affirmation that you've done a great thing. And once again, I told you I stalked Charlotte. So this is Charlotte's condo that was close to Hawthorne, California, where the Mattel headquarters was at the time. She purchased this condo in '64, probably after she kind of had made the commitment that this was going to be her career. And I kind of explored all around the area because, you know, that's what you do when you're stalking somebody that doesn't live there anymore. And just kind of got a lay of the land of where Charlotte lived. And so this is it at night. And this was her view of downtown Los Angeles. And what I'll tell you is around the time of the early 80s, about 1980, Charlotte's memory started failing her. And during a meeting, she got confused and became very agitated. And at the end of the meeting, she was pulled aside and said, you know, perhaps you should get checked out. Maybe something's going on. And so she kind of knew it was probably time to retire. She was maybe 63 at the time, so she was young. And soon thereafter, she retired, and I'm not 100% certain when she moved, but she moved into a facility where I think even in the early 80s, we didn't know what Alzheimer's was. We'd not even given it that name, if we even knew that name at that moment. But she moved to an assisted living center where they took care of her. And this would probably be like the early to mid 80s. And Charlotte would live there in Santa Monica overlooking the Pacific Ocean. And she would live there until she passed away in 1997. That's a long time to live without your mind. And to me, it's very sad. But, you know, I think of the contribution that she made on the doll world and what she did. And she never really got to be around the collectors for us to kind of like, you know, give her the praise that she really kind of deserves. And so when she passed away in January of 1997, Ruth Handler eulogized her at her funeral. And she said that many could have done what Charlotte did. No one could have done it better. And I think that speaks volumes. And then when Chris and I come to Kansas City, we always love to research Charlotte. We did a road trip to Omaha, Nebraska, where she's interred at the cemetery there. And we actually went on Barbie's birthday, and we put pink roses on her grave and just kind of really paid homage to her. We visited her childhood home and that's another story for another day. But we visited her home. They actually let me into her house, and we got to go through it. And, you know, I love this picture of Charlotte because she looks just happy. And this is when she was visiting Hong Kong to set up the Hong Kong production. And I just think that she was just really pleased with this. And here's Charlotte in the 70s with Donnie Marie, because we know they did the Donnie Marie dolls. And it's just sort of a moment, you know, that I just really think that she was happiest when she was creating and knowing that her work was being manufactured and loved by children all over the planet. And in a lot of the photos that we see of her, she's wearing pearls, and pearls were her favorite. And, you know, I think of a pearl much like I think of Charlotte as just being classic. And she was a beautiful and elegant person. She wasn't like a bombshell. She really didn't need to be, because she was talented and she was driven in a way that we just love. She, you know, the things I've discovered about her, because, you know, when you're researching, you want to know everything. She was right-handed. She loved the color red. She was well-spoken. She was just a very, very driven, detail-oriented person. And I just think she just had an eye for style and elegance. And those original 22 garments that she created for Barbie are so classic today. They're so iconic. They're so, you know, and when you think about how that had to be created to be mass produced, it's just kind of mind-blowing. And so I feel that we all owe a debt of gratitude to her eye for detail and her driven personality to do nothing but succeed. So this is Charlotte. Thank you. And so I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody has about Barbie or Charlotte.
How long did you say that she actually lived in Japan, creating that first collection?
She was there for about a year, kind of setting it all up, and then she would return each year once they had shown the line, and she would go back each year to set up the production and kind of refine things. She really didn't design a whole lot after that first year. She would perfect things, and she would maybe recreate something in a pinch if what they were doing was not able to be produced the way they were hoping. So she did a few things throughout her career for Barbie, but at that point she was depending on the other. They usually had between 3 and 5 designers working on Barbie at any time. And we've done a lot of research to kind of discover who these other designers were and get names. Carol Spencer, who's been an enormous contributor to our museum with the dolls, and not only dolls, but information, ephemera, and documentation, and stories. We've discovered some of those names, so we've been able to turn up some information. My favorite one that Carol told us about was a gentleman that was hired in the early 70s by the name of Keith Hodges. And he designed for maybe a year and did some early 70s fashions, but kind of made his exodus when they kind of frowned upon the fact that he posed naked for a magazine. So, you know, they were a little straight-laced, I think, at the time.
Yes, in some ways.
So,
Kind of still are.
yeah, they very are. They very much so are. Other questions?
Yeah, I remember my mom used to make dresses and things for my sister's Barbies.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure she made them from patterns because mom just didn't originate things. Did she have any part in that?
You know, the earliest patterns were done by the Advanced Pattern Company, and they were licensed with Mattel. They had very similar illustrations. I don't know if they approved them or whatever, but those earliest advanced patterns have some very similar characteristics of the early patterns. The early Barbie clothes, fewer side seams, the sleeves being set in upside down. And everyone loves those patterns, but I think the home sewers had a little bit of difficulty wrapping their head around that process. So then what they would do is the subsequent ones were more or less designed like people clothes, just tinier, and that's where you get into your headache. So,
the blouse had 8 darts.
Exactly. And we know you can't do 8 darts in manufacturing. So, and my other favorite dress, I don't have an example. There is a fitted sheath dress that was done for Barbie in 1966, and the dress itself is with sleeves is cut from one pattern piece, one simple pattern piece. So it's kind of amazing how they had this vision to be able to do that. So.
Bradley, one of our viewers wrote in and asked if there was something that was ever put into production and then it didn't work and they took it out of production.
There are always a few things that they will produce that either they have a problem with or fabric availability. And a lot of times, like with some of the what we call the big 3 of the first year, Roman Holiday, Gay Parisienne, and Easter Parade, they were in the line for such a short period of time, and we suspect that one of the reasons was cost or the way they had to be manufactured or something, and so I think they just kind of eliminate them from the line. And sometimes I think with like the Gay Parisienne, it was the bubble dress, and that was pretty much a fad, and so I think the style was pretty much over as quickly as it began, so they would eliminate something if it was not fashionable. But usually they would design things not only to be available for that 1 year, but to be available for about 3 years.
And we have one more. It's a personal question about Barbie, but she was photographed in that wedding dress. Did Barbie ever actually get married?
You know, that's up to the child. That's what
Okay.
I was, you know, Barbie has never gotten married unless you chose your Barbie to get married and married to whomever you want them to get married to. But they always have a wedding gown, and that's just part of the original concept that Ruth Handler had of acting out situations and creating circumstances with your dolls and role-playing with your dolls and creating the situation that you want. You know, Barbie, little girls always look at Barbie as being, you know, 5 or 6 years older than them. So it was just a method for working out your dreams and fantasies and that sort of thing. So, you know, your Barbie might have gotten married, mine didn't. Other questions?
If I follow up on that, I was a merchandiser for Mattel for about 3 or 4 years, 20 years ago or so, but we had to be very careful to say that Mattel never had Barbie get married. The wedding fashions would be titled Dream Fashion or Fantasy Wedding or something like that, but it was made for the child to make that decision, but in their mind, Barbie was pure forever,
Right.
and they did not advertise her as being married.
That is good to know. That is good information. Other questions?
Bitch got married, didn't she?
She did get married, and then she had a baby.
Wedding set, yeah.
We have one more personal question for Bradley. What is your favorite Barbie decade?
Oh, that's a hard question. Well, I will always say that my favorite era of Barbie is probably from about 73 to 76. And it's not a real dazzling period for Barbie, but that's the era that I played with Barbie. And so Sweet 16 will always be one of my favorite Barbies, but I really, really, really love the late 60s and Francie and the eyelash era. And once I kind of got to studying about Charlotte and paying attention to this, I loved like the first couple of years passionately. And it's just, to me, each era has its own great quality, and, you know, it tells a story. And, you know, you can kind of not only follow the history of fashion, but of Barbie and of Mattel and what was going on with our economy and our world through all of these fashions. It's kind of a time capsule of the world.
Thank you. It was so interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was
I
wonderful.
appreciate you.
Hey Bradley, this isn't clothes related, but why did they make Barbie so anatomically unreal? Was
I
it
think
so-
she's very real.
Was that right?
Well, what I would say, she it's very much into the build Lily. But if you think about, I want you to think about fashion magazines in like the 1950s and 60s.
Oh.
Everybody wore
Marilyn
this.
Monroe,
Yeah, well,
Jane
Marilyn,
Russell.
and not only that, but you know, every other page was Maiden Form. I dreamed I won the lottery in my Maiden Form bra.
Yeah.
Everybody wore those bullet bras. Everybody wore that power neck girdle to make your waist tiny. When Dior created the new look in 1947, not only did they create a new fashion, they actually had to create a whole new method of undergarment to be able to create that look, they actually had to have padded hips and stuff. So that era, that was the shape of a woman. You had a bust, you had a tiny waist, and you had hips. So since '98, they've given Barbie a lot of different bodies, a lot of different proportions, and you know, I think real people look like that. At least in my mind, they do.
Somebody wrote in and said that they heard a rumor that when they quit putting underwear on Barbie, Mattel saved $3 million a year. Is that true?
That wouldn't surprise me. They actually did eliminate putting on panties, and they would always get complaints. So starting in the late 80s, early 90s, they actually came up with a method, and Carol Spencer actually created this method of doing molded panties on Barbie. And so that actually probably saved them a lot of time and fabric and effort.
So it's
and
true.
It's probably very true.
That's interesting. So she had molded underwear?
She does most of the time now.
Oh, I guess we'll see some of that later when we look at the Barbies.
Oh, we're not going to look up under her clothes, are we?
Oh, maybe not.
We can. So, but once again, thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, I hope everybody will enjoy touring the museum some more, and we'll have some more little surprises for you, I'm sure. So thank you.
Thank you.